The second identity that we look at is the history man. And it's because in that Millennium Message, Mr. Putin says that Russia should go back. Here it is, it's on the eve of the 21st century, but Russia should find its path forward into that new millennium by looking back to its past, its deep past, not just the past of the 1990s where everything was in chaos, a kind of time of troubles, which is a constant theme in Russian history, but way back to almost to the very origins of the Russian state. And you can debate when those are, but that's the theme that Putin picks up. And as he moves forward in his presidency over the first decade of the 21st century, he's constantly hitting these historical themes, and he makes himself a protagonist in Russian history. And so when he decides to come back as president in September of 2011, or at least he announces he's going to come back as president, he actually says it's because he wants to, in many respects, see to its full conclusion all of the reforms that have been initiated and attempted over the sweep of Russian history, going back into the 19th century in particular, and that he sees himself as really the only person, as someone coming from the deep state, from the state bureaucracy, for being this statist, who can really guarantee that this will be completed. So he becomes the history man. He becomes the standard bearer of centuries of Russian attempts to reform the state, to put the Russian state on a firm footing, to give the Russian state the greatness that he believes it should have.
And that then comes to the third identity that we talk about. The first was the statist. Second was the man of history, whether it's the student of history or the figure in history, but the history man. And the third is the survivalist. I find this really fascinating. This notion, because it's about the survival of the Russian state. And that ultimately, that is the most important thing, to ensure survival. From that come several features of his behavior and his outlook that I think are absolutely essential. Number one, there's an amazing sense of risk aversion, avoiding risk. You have to always be aware of a worst case outcome. You cannot take big gambles. Maybe they will pay off if they work, but if they don't work, they would lead to the collapse, to the destruction, to the disappearance of the Russian state. And several of the things that he's done, again, from the very beginning, are only, I think, interpretable or understandable from that standpoint. Number one, build up reserves. When he took over as prime minister and then as president, Russia was essentially bankrupt. It was essentially in receivership. The IMF was dictating policies to Russia as they have done in countries in the third world or other bankrupt countries. And in a very short time, he used the oil revenues, because the oil price, very fortunately for him, world oil price began to soar upwards. He collected that revenue and used it to pay off the foreign debt. So within just a few years, he's restored, as he has said explicitly, restored the sovereignty of Russia and guaranteed its survival. And I think that this notion of always preparing for a worst case outcome, it again is something we also in the book trace back even to his own personal background, his family history. You said he's from Leningrad, the city that was besieged by the Nazis in World War II, where hundreds of thousands, many hundreds of thousands of citizens starved. And Putin has had experiences even in his own political career after the Soviet Union where he's had to deal with these sort of survival crises, including when he was deputy mayor in St. Petersburg, and the city in those first months of New Russia was devoid of food. He had to figure out how to get food to the city. But it keeps coming back, and you will find it almost daily in his speeches and his context, the reflection of this notion of Putin as the survivor and the survivalist.